name is Paul Vallone, and you are listening to the Big Talker Network at bigtalker.live. I'd like to welcome you to Guns, Politics, and Freedom, where each Saturday at 1 p.m., Sunday at 5 p.m., and weekdays at 11, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. In case you aren't familiar with me, I direct Grassroots North Carolina, or GRNC, since 1994, our state's most effective gun rights organization. As its director, I was involved in drafting and passing our original concealed handgun permit law. Since then, GRNC has gone on to engineer passage of concealed handgun reciprocity, our purchase permit bypass, Castle Doctrine and Stand Your Ground, the expansion of concealed carry into state and municipal parks, restaurants, public assemblies, educational properties, and much more. Grassroots North Carolina is exactly what the name implies, a grassroots collection of volunteers from all walks of life who share a common concern that our constitutionally guaranteed freedoms are being eroded. Check us out at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. Welcome to day 606 of the Biden insurgency. Like the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the onslaught against your civil liberties right here in America is gradually taking territory on a broad array of fronts. As part of the efforts of radical extremists to depict you as the radical extremist, the divisive rhetoric is heating up not only from Uncle Joe Biden, but also in op-eds from leftist talking heads and even from the Department of Justice. Behold the left's attempt to depict ordinary Americans, fully 74 million Donald Trump voters, as dangerous extremists. It isn't they, but rather you, who is the threat to democracy. If you have the gall to object to your kids being indoctrinated with critical race theory or gender ambiguity, they want to invoke the Patriot Act against you as a domestic terrorist. If you watched the documentary 2,000 Mules and agree that the 2020 elections were rife with fraud, you are an insurrectionist. If you believe the Second Amendment guarantees an individual right to arms, the FBI considers you a militia violent extremist. And as for what the left claims is a rise in right-wing extremism, which side is it that rioted across the country with its own leaders silent as rioters burned, looted, and murdered? Which side is releasing violent criminals without bail, advocating the defunding and demoralization of police, leading to a surge in violent crime, threatening the lives of Supreme Court justices, and burning pro-life pregnancy centers? And which side is trying to transform our nation from a constitutional republic to a socialist, quote, republic, end quote? Exactly who's trying to preserve things and who's trying to radically change them? The enduring habit of the left is to preemptively accuse opponents of doing exactly what it is. This would be funny if it weren't so dangerous. Pay attention, folks. Within their divisive rhetoric lies the kernel of what they have in mind for anyone who dares disagree. More on this later in the show, but first, this just in gun rights news. The massive power grab by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives under Joe Biden's anti-gun nominee Steve Dettelbach continues. First, the ATF recently tipped its hand in a budget request to the Office of Management and Budget when it said, and I quote, "Due to the upcoming amnesty registration of pistol brace weapons, photos of the weapon being registered will be required to prove the weapon does utilize a pistol brace in its configuration and would qualify for an amnesty registration." That would be the product of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking from last year, in which the ATF plans to require owners of the roughly 4 million AR-15 style pistols utilizing stabilizing braces to register the guns under the 1934 National Firearms Act as short-barreled rifles. You may recall that the ATF has twice changed its position so far on the braces, which are intended to enable wounded veterans to shoot relatively heavy AR-15 style pistols. More recently, under the Trump administration, both the braces and their incidental use from the shoulder are legal. The ATF has so far made no official proclamation, which is expected in December. How the ATF intends to register 4 million guns, or whatever proportion of gun owners actually choose not to ignore the law, when it presently takes more than a year to process other NFA applications, remains to be seen. More on this as it develops. Elsewhere, the ATF continues its door-to-door campaign of terror. You may recall that it has been videotaped and otherwise recorded, demanding that the buyer in a multiple firearm purchase produce the guns for inspection. Showing up to intimidate buyers of previously legal forced reset triggers, such as the rare breed FRT-15, and even prosecuting one man for having them, as a machine gun, by the way. Declaring solvent traps, often used to make legal, registered sound suppressors, to be themselves sound suppressors. And then showing up at the door of buyers, demanding they either turn them in or sign a statement saying they'd been destroyed. All of this, of course, in addition to the illegal gun registry that the ATF is compiling, as evidenced by a congressional FOIA request in which the agency admitted to compiling 920 million firearm transaction records, with the vast majority already digitized, in violation of both the 1986 Firearms Owners Protection Act and the 1993 Brady Act. Well, the latest outrage from the federal government, this time the FBI, no more trustworthy than the ATF lately. According to the Epoch Times, FBI agents have been showing up at people's doors, demanding they sign a form relinquishing their right to keep and bear arms, and making them forever a prohibited person, barred from owning guns in the computerized National Instant Background Check System. According to a FOIA request from Gun Owners of America, at least 15 people filled out the forms. The completed self-submission forms show people gave their mental health records to the FBI and signed to accept that, and I quote, completion and submission of this form will result in denial of my right to purchase, to possess, and to use any firearm. Said Robert J. Olson, an attorney for GOA, and I quote, we have the records of 15 cases so far, but for all we know it could be 1,500 or 15,000. The FBI tells us these persons were put in the NICS system as mentally prohibited, and there's no way to track who is entered on the basis of this form. But the burden is on the FBI to fix this because they had no power to put these people into the system in the first place. According to GOA, the FBI disarmed a high school student who wasn't even of legal age to own a firearm and didn't want one for looking online for hacking advice on a school computer. In a September 8th letter to Attorney General Merrick Garland and FBI Director Christopher Wray, GOA gave the FBI 30 days, as stipulated in law, to remove the names wrongfully added and to confirm they are no longer using the form. More on this as it develops. Unfortunately, the onslaught against your Second Amendment rights is not occurring just in the political arena. The left has become quite adept at using woke corporations to attack your rights. Thanks to demands by the usual suspects, namely Attorneys General Letitia James of New York, of NRA lawsuit fame, and Rob Bonta of California, who recently doxed all of the concealed handgun permit holders in his state, and large pension plans from those self-same bastions of leftism, New York and California, major credit card companies will now be engaging in backdoor gun registration by classifying gun purchases differently than other transactions. The International Organization of Standardization's Registration and Maintenance Management Group met in early September to discuss a request by Amalgamated Bank to set up the code. The group had previously opposed the change but knuckled under pressure. According to the Epoch Times, Amalgamated Bank, which calls itself, and I quote, America's socially responsible bank, said that its decision to push for creating the new code is, quote, the result of nearly 3 years of research and partnership with issue experts at Guns Down America and the Giffords Law Center, gun control organizations, and broad support from elected officials, pension funds, and others across the United States. Yeah, other leftists. MasterCard, Visa, and American Express have all agreed to the change. More on this after a short break. Right now, you're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on the Big Talker Network at bigtalker.live. After a short break, we will return with still more information better enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You are listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on the Big Talker Network at bigtalker.live. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Before our break, we discussed how the onslaught against your Second Amendment rights is not occurring just in the political arena. The International Organization for Standardization met in early September to discuss a request made by Amalgamated Bank to set up a unique code for gun-related purchases. The group had previously opposed the change but knuckled under pressure. According to the Epoch Times, Amalgamated Bank, which calls itself America's socially responsible bank, decided to push for the new code as the result of 3 years of research and partnership with gun control organizations, namely Guns Down America and the Giffords Law Center. MasterCard, Visa, and American Express have all agreed to the change. According to Dave Workman, writing in AmmoLand.com, U.S. Senator Josh Hawley, Republican from Missouri, sent a letter to the CEOs of all three credit card companies asserting, and I quote, "The new system is ripe for abuse and brings to mind similar policies of big tech companies and payment processors that have targeted law-abiding Americans for engaging in constitutionally protected activities. I urge you to immediately reverse course." Too often, Hawley wrote, companies have abused their market power to target the constitutional rights of conservatives and others with minority viewpoints. Your proposal to track firearm-related purchases further threatens Americans who are simply exercising their constitutional rights. How this will shake out remains to be seen. There are a number of senators who recently, just in the last couple of days, are now demanding that credit card companies who are free to disregard this practice do so. One pundit is calling this financial deplatforming. One could easily see gun control organizations and anti-gun governments pressuring credit card companies to stop gun transactions altogether. And then, of course, we have the FBI, which will probably sniff around for the transaction records, exactly as the New York Post reports that they spied on private Facebook messages of those who questioned the outcome of the 2020 elections. But wait, there's more. It isn't just credit card companies and woke pension funds trying to deprive you of your rights. To that category, you may now add UPS, which is threatening to restrict gun shipments. Says John Crump, writing in AmmoLand.com, and I quote, "Sellers who do not ship at least 350 handguns a week risk losing their shipping accounts. Under the new agreement, UPS is only required to give customers a 10-day notice before cutting them off from the shipping service. The volume necessary means that most online retailers and manufacturers are now cut off from shipping guns through the carrier unless the handgun is shipped using the expensive next-day air service." The notice was sent to UPS customers that deal in firearms. UPS had been under pressure from anti-gun groups and politicians to stop doing business with the gun industry. The new move appears to be a way that UPS can cut ties with most of the industry without jeopardizing major accounts. The letter also references updating its policies to be in line with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, ATF, and state regulations. This reference most likely refers to new rules surrounding privately manufactured firearms. But UPS goes much further than required by law. Crump also points out that UPS has been at the center of controversy recently when it canceled the account of Ghost Firearms, a seller of 80% lowers, telling the company it would seize and destroy packages currently en route to customers and leaving Ghost Firearms scrambling for options. A month later, Under pressure from the Giffords Law Center to prevent gun violence, FedEx followed suit and stopped shipping unfinished frames and receivers. The lesson here is that the left is very good at getting corporations to do their bidding, and it is high time for gun-owning conservatives to adopt the same tactics. You know, there are a couple of things I hear from gun owners, usually the ones that don't participate in defending their rights. The first one is, I don't care what they ban, they ain't getting my guns. I respond, wouldn't you rather not be a felon? Governments can't control the law-abiding. That's why they pass laws making you a lawbreaker, to better control you. Of course, the corollary here is that when people tell me they don't do politics, I reply, well, that's your choice, of course, but I can assure you that if you don't do politics, then politics will almost certainly do you. The second thing I hear is when somebody says, if they come to confiscate my guns, they're getting them one bullet at a time. But this claim, in addition to not having high odds for success, demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of how gun confiscation works, especially in the high-tech world. Case in point, we've all heard how the state of New York, from which I am a refugee, by the way, and its leftist governor, Kathy Hochul, have thumbed their nose at the Supreme Court decision in New York State Rifle and Pistol versus Bruin. And instead of complying with the High Court's beatdown of good cause requirements for concealed handgun permits, New York has passed legislation by the Orwellian name of the Concealed Carry Improvement Act. Have you noticed that leftists love to name legislation to reflect the opposite of what it does? Sort of like the Inflation Reduction Act that supercharges inflation? Anyway, the new law effectively makes it a felony for permit holders to actually carry anywhere, including banning all guns in large swaths of territory they call sensitive areas. This, by the way, is in clear contravention of the majority opinion written by Justice Clarence Thomas, which said, and I quote, expanding the category of sensitive areas simply to all places of public congregation that are not isolated from law enforcement defines the category of sensitive places too broadly. Put simply, there is no historical basis for New York to effectively declare the island of Manhattan a sensitive place simply because it's crowded and protected generally by the New York City Police Department. And of course, one of these sensitive areas is the entirety of Times Square, which has conveniently posted nice big LED lighted signs declaring it a gun-free zone. Personally, I find it thoughtful of New York to give all those violent felons that they let out without bail a heads up to know where they can rape, pillage, and plunder and murder with impunity, secure in the knowledge that they won't encounter any armed victims. The Guardian of Britain quotes Carrie Clegg, a cake artist from London, visiting with her daughter Claudia, who said the signage, quote, makes me feel a little bit better. It has to be said because we know that there have been problems before. She added that bustling hubs like Times Square could be big targets because it's a very crowded, very touristy place. Perfect logic, Carrie, because we all know that in ostensibly gun-free Britain, those big touristy crowded places have never been targeted by, say, terrorists. But I digress. Returning to my point of how gun confiscation will work in modern America, you probably know that in New York, all firearms are required to be registered. Well, according to John Crump, writing in AmmoLand.com, the ever-thoughtful city of New York wants to make sure you know the rules, so in a letter dated August 31st, 2022, Inspector Hugh Bogle of the NYPD informed business owners with active businesses that active business, limited carry, special carry, or carry business licenses, that their business might now be in a sensitive area, and were informed to bring their guns to the police station so that the guns can be, and I quote, safeguarded, or remove them from the location. You see, folks, that's how gun confiscation works in the modern world. They're not going to go knocking on doors to confiscate firearms. That would be way too inefficient, not to mention dangerous. I mean, they just don't have that many SWAT teams. Nope, what they're going to do instead is register your guns, because after all, what law-abiding citizen would mind registering their guns? And then they ban your gun, or ban you from owning a gun. They simply send a letter, And if you ignore the letter, they issue a warrant for your arrest. Maybe they pull you over at a traffic stop. Maybe it'll be when you report a violent crime against you. It is then they will slap the cuffs on you, and it's off to prison for you. Do they do that a few dozen times, the rest of the sheep will fall quickly into line. Incidentally, this is not the first time New York has done that. When they passed the misnamed SAFE Act in 2013, it barred from possessing handgun permits a variety of people whom it claimed were, quote, dangerously mentally ill, further adding to its statute requiring mental health professionals to report patients they deemed, quote, likely to engage in conduct that would result in serious harm to self or others. Bingo. Send them a letter saying, in the words of Dianne Feinstein, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in. This was the case in 2017 in a county I lived in when Don Hall and his girlfriend were sitting in the living room when they noticed police lights outside their home. When the 70-year-old Army veteran greeted Oneida County Sheriff Department deputies, he was given a document saying he had to turn over his 6 guns because he had been declared a mental defective. Shocked, he told them he had no history of mental issues. No matter. The deputies asserted that he must have triggered the order under New York's Secure Ammunition and Firearms Enforcement Act. The lesson of all this is that registration is the necessary prelude to confiscation. They can't ban what they can't find. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on the Big Talker Network, bigtalker.live. After a short break, we'll return with more information enabling you to better defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on the Big Talker Network at bigtalker.live. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at hyattguns.com. Right now, grab a pen because later in this segment, I will give you some important candidate information for the November 8th general election. You know, I was just so proud the other day when our own little Asheville made national news. I mean, Asheville is where I go from my rural location when I have a medical appointment or I want to dine at a good restaurant, because Asheville is properly artsy-crassy with all sorts of interesting restaurants and galleries and brew pubs and coffee houses. And after all, little Asheville, population 96,829, isn't as hard to navigate as Charlotte or Raleigh. And in 2016, it was named among the 10 best U.S. travel destinations by Travel and Leisure. So imagine my surprise when Asheville's recent national attention wasn't exactly laudatory. In fact, the Fox News headline was, and I quote, Democrat-run tourist town in North Carolina sees violent crime spike as police dwindle. Perfect storm. And the subtitle was, Asheville, North Carolina has seen a 31% surge in violent crime within 5 years. It seems that Asheville's growth in violent crime is nearly double that of the national average and ranks among the highest in North Carolina, where violent crime has increased 13% statewide. Worse, Asheville has so far seen 11 homicides in 2022, setting it on pace to surpass the homicide rate of 2021 and 2020. The rates of homelessness have increased 21% since 2021, according to data released in May, and there's evidence of increased Mexican drug cartel activity in the area. But why? Why would little Asheville suddenly turn into Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome? Well, former Buncombe County Sheriff Van Duncan says, and I quote, I think what you're seeing in Asheville right now is a culmination of the last several years of pulling police back and not letting them do their jobs like they're able to do. And according to Fox News interviews with members of the Buncombe County Sheriff's Department and Asheville Police, all on conditions of anonymity, of course, the problem rests with Asheville's lefty city government and its agenda to defund, demoralize, and undermine the police. You may recall that in 2020, the Asheville City Council voted 5-2 to defund its police department to the tune of 3% or $770,000. The two city council members who opposed the cut, Shanika Smith and Brian Haynes, didn't oppose the measure because it was insane, which it was. They did it because, in their words, quote, with the stated goal of seriously addressing black Asheville demands, of divesting from the police and investing in black communities, these proposed cuts fall way short. Perhaps that savings, if such could be said, better enabled Asheville City Council for its next feat, paying black residents $2.1 million in reparations. Money I'm sure was well spent. Of course, the resulting flight of law enforcement officers retiring or just quitting means that last year Asheville stopped answering 911 calls for a variety of nonviolent crimes. No matter, at least they're paying reparations. Do you suppose they're paying reparations to the mugged and the families of the murdered due to their little lefty agenda? Don't know. One anonymously interviewed police officer laid blame on Buncombe County District Attorney Todd Williams, a George Soros type of Democrat, apparently in the mold of George Gascon and Alvin Bragg. Of course, the Asheville City Council's little jihad against police has had some consequences. In June of 2021, they said they would no longer be able to respond to 911 calls about theft, fraud, trespassing after losing a third of their force. Yep, Asheville is our own little Portland, Oregon. And that is an accurate analogy, since the homeless now occupy Pack Square Park in downtown Asheville, and APD Chief David Zack says fentanyl is, quote, out of control in his city. But the real similarity to Portland is that it is, in the words of Chad Nesbitt, the former chair of the Buncombe County GOP, who now works as a local investigative journalist, a hub of Antifa in a region. While covering the riots in Asheville, Nesbitt was attacked by Antifites and suffered a traumatic brain injury. It seems that the anarchists operate from the Firestorm Bookstore Co-op in West Asheville. Then, of course, we have Jane's Revenge, which, like those peaceful protesters elsewhere in the country, protested the Dobbs decision by vandalizing mountain area pregnancy services, by breaking windows, spray painting graffiti saying, if abortions aren't safe, neither are you. At least they didn't firebomb it like they did in other cities, I guess. Speaking of bombs, in July, two of those charming anarchists, Shioki Fugati, 23, and Duncan Small, 30, were arrested for setting off two bombs in downtown Asheville with the apparent intention of destroying a local monument. But remember that according to Joe Biden, and as echoed by his sycophantic press, it is not the anarchists rioting and firebombing pregnancy centers or attacking journalists that are the threat to democracy. Nah, the real threat to democracy is you. On a different note, don't forget that elections are coming up soon. The deadline for registering to vote or changing your voter registration is October 14th. If you aren't registered by then, you can still do one-stop registration and voting at selected sites in your county between October 20th and November 5th, with early voting ending on October 5th at 3 p.m. I don't have to tell you how crucial it is that you not only vote, but also bring like-minded family, friends, and coworkers to the polls. We have a number of critical statewide races coming up. First and foremost is the race for the open U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Richard Burr, who thankfully is retiring. This seat is critical for control of the U.S. Senate. We have to keep it in Republican hands. The Democrat running for the seat is Sherry Beasley, who is a former Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court and who has said she would be the 51st vote to end the filibuster if elected. And folks, ending the filibuster would mean passage of a ban on semi-automatic firearms, universal gun registration, and much more. Fortunately, the Republican candidate opposing her is Ted Budd, who currently serves in the U.S. House. He's a gun shop owner and has the best pro-gun voting and bill sponsorship record among North Carolina's congressional delegation. The problem is that Real Clear Politics and its polling average puts Budd only 1.3% ahead of Beasley, 44.8 to 43.5. And of course, the leftist media is attacking Budd more or less continuously. So we need you to muster votes for Ted Budd for U.S. Senate. Also important are 2 races for the North Carolina Supreme Court. Now, maybe you don't normally vote judicial races. It can be difficult to know who the best candidates are. And until a few years ago, the Democrat-controlled legislature at that point deliberately kept you in the dark by making judicial races supposedly nonpartisan. Ha ha. If you're wondering why we still don't have a voter ID law, making it easier for the left to steal elections, despite the fact that you and the citizens of North Carolina passed voter ID in a statewide ballot referendum, well, you can thank the Democrat-controlled North Carolina Supreme Court, which in a 4-3 party line vote decided that voter ID law was somehow unconstitutional. The same Democrat-controlled court threw out the districts you elected legislators to draw, costing conservatives roughly 3 congressional seats. The good news here is that there is an open seat, seat 3, in the North Carolina Supreme Court races, pitting Democrat Lucy Inman against Republican Rich Dietz, and that's D-I-E-T-Z, but it's pronounced Dietz. Dietz has a proven track record as an originalist, pro-Second Amendment conservative. I strongly recommend you vote Rich Dietz for North Carolina Supreme Court Seat 3. Meanwhile, the race for North Carolina Supreme Court Seat 5 pits incumbent Democrat Sam Ervin IV against Republican Trey Allen. Ervin talks a good game about being fair and impartial, but he has a problem in striking down, he was part of the problem in striking down voter ID in the congressional districts. Meanwhile, Trey Allen is a conservative and originalist who clerked for and is endorsed by conservative Chief Justice Paul Newby. I recommend you vote Trey Allen for North Carolina Supreme Court. Let's not forget Court of Appeals races. Seat 8, vote for Republican Julie Flood. Seat 9, vote for Republican Donna Stroud. Seat 10, vote for Republican John Marsh Tyson. And for Seat 11, it's very important that you vote Republican Mike Stadding. Stadding's opponent, Darren Jackson, was a devout anti-gun leftist when he served in the North Carolina House. So, vote Michael Stadding for Seat 11. This and other information is available for congressional candidates candidates for the North Carolina General Assembly are available at grnc.org, grnc.org. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on the Big Talker Network. After a short break, we will return with more information better enabling you to defend your gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You're listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom today on the Big Talker Network at BigTalker.live. Our show is sponsored by Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop. Check them out at HyattGuns.com. As we noted before the break, Grassroots North Carolina runs a very ambitious voter education project called Remember in November, a guide to candidates' views on guns, in which we issue candidate surveys to all candidates for state and federal office across the state, and we compile voting and bill sponsorship records on gun issues. Then we plug it into a database which objectively estimates the percentage of time a given candidate can be expected to agree with a control group of conservative gun owners. A candidate who agrees at least 90% of the time gets 4 stars, 80% 3 stars, on down the list. All of this, of course, in addition to going onto our website, gets formatted into brochure-size voter guides that you can take to the polls. This year, we're printing 150,000 voter guides, of which 120,000 will be mailed directly to gun-owning voters. Again, you can find the candidate data sorted by either name or district at grnc.org. That's grnc.org. In coming days, the site will also feature candidate recommendations, our equivalent to endorsements, from our Political Action Committee, the GRNC Political Victory Fund. We will also have links to the Judicial Fairness Project, a super PAC which makes recommendations for the judicial races we discussed in the last segment of the show. On the site at grnc.org, you can also find our Let's Go Brandon politically incorrect raffle. Thanks to Carolina Sporting Arms in Charlotte, the GRNC Political Victory Fund is raising money to kick tail in the 2022 elections by raffling off a choice Springfield Victor M-Lock AR-15, complete with Hex Dragonfly optic. MSRP on the rifle and optic together is $1,399, but it gets better. In addition to the state-of-the-art rifle, the winner gets 2 Magpul PMag 30-round magazines emblazoned with the now famous "Let's Go Brandon" slam on Joe Biden, plus 200 rounds of ammunition. For the price of a raffle ticket, you can proudly display your feelings toward the Biden gun ban agenda. Best of all, you get not only a chance to raise a salute, if you will, to gun control leftists everywhere, but also to help GRNC's federally registered Political Action Committee elect candidates who respect the Second Amendment. As you recall, GRNC is restricted by law from using membership funds to impact elections, requiring us to raise additional funds to throw the bums out. So tick off the anti-liberty leftists who, while helping elect candidates who support your rights by buying lots of GRNC Political Victory Fund raffle tickets. And again, you can go find all of this by going to grnc.org, grnc.org. At every turn, Biden, his handlers, and his enablers in the media are painting you as an extremist, a semi-fascist, whatever that means, a violent extremist, even a threat to democracy. Ignoring for a moment, that ours is not a democracy, but instead a republic, the man, or rather his handlers, who accuses you of being a threat to democracy is himself the one working to undermine our system of government. I'm sure the backdrop and the imagery of the eagle, that red backdrop flanked by the military, the Marines specifically, at Joe Biden's recent Philadelphia speech were not entirely intentional, since I'm sure Joe's handlers didn't want to project totalitarian power, at least not so overtly. But I would offer that at the level of the presidency, nothing you see is exactly an accident. According to Biden, 73.6 million Americans who voted for Donald Trump are not only semi-fascist, but also a threat to American democracy. This, of course, is a standard leftist tactic I describe in my book, Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. I suspect they learned it from the old Soviet Union, and I call the tactic preemptive accusation, in which they accuse you of doing exactly what they are doing. Why do they do it? Because it puts you on the defensive. When you respond by saying, no, it's you who's doing this, it sounds like that old child's rebuttal, I know you are, but what am I? Argument lost. So let's take a look at who the real fascists are, shall we? Under the Clinton, Obama, and Biden administrations, we have witnessed the weaponization of federal law enforcement agencies, not only against terrorists, but against mainstream Americans. Moreover, the trend is accelerating. During the Obama administration, we saw Lois Lerner weaponize the IRS to systematically deny nonprofit status to Tea Party and other conservative organizations, including Catherine Engelbrecht, the founder of True the Vote, which documented the trafficking of ballots in the 2020 elections that eventually became Dinesh D'Souza's movie 2,000 Mules. Incidentally, the Obama administration didn't just task the IRS with destroying Engelbrecht. She and her husband suffered 15 audits and investigations from the FBI, BATFE, and OSHA. In 2016, Barack Obama's FBI abused the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant system, lying to the FISA court to spy on Donald Trump through his aide Carter Page, not only during the campaign, but even after he took office. In June of last year, the Department of Homeland Security, ignoring a year of violent riots by Antifa and BLM, released its, quote, national strategy for countering domestic terrorism to defend against what it defined as domestic violent extremists, including what it claimed were white supremacists and militia violent extremists, which, of course, they defined to include you. Last October, Attorney General Merrick Garland, in an apparent response to the National School Board Association request to invoke the Patriot Act against parents who have the audacity to stand up to schools pushing critical race theory and the sexualization of their children. Garland issued a memorandum threatening to have the FBI investigate parents. Then just a few weeks ago, documents leaked to Project Veritas from one of an increasing number of FBI whistleblowers depicted how the FBI considers people who display the Gadsden flag, the Betsy Ross flag, or even who use the symbol 2A for the Second Amendment are militia violent extremists. End quote. Ironically, on the weekend of August 6th, I did a blog on that calling the FBI the Gestapo, after which, on the following Monday morning, They proved me right by sending agents armed to the teeth to raid the home of a former president of the United States. And this, by the way, does not count having the FBI do a SWAT-type pre-dawn raid on Trump associate Roger Stone, putting Peter Navarro in handcuffs and leg irons at the Nashville airport for the horrific crime of refusing to participate in Nancy Pelosi's sham congressional hearings, or seizing the cell phone of Congressman Scott Perry while he was traveling with his family, all clearly depicting an FBI serving as a political weapon against Biden's political opposition. And let us not forget the deliberately misnamed Inflation Reduction Act recently passed by Biden and congressional Democrats, which contains $80 billion for the IRS to create no fewer than 87,000 armed, yes, armed IRS agents. It's long been a favorite of leftist administrations to bypass the Posse Comitatus Act, which limits the use of the military for domestic law enforcement by militarizing federal agencies. Bill Clinton did it with the IRS, the EPA, and even, if you can believe this, the Department of Education. But at no time in our history has an administration so thoroughly weaponized the federal government against its own people. And finally, the self-proclaimed great uniter, Joe Biden, while once again denouncing Republicans, had the gall to call Trump supporters semi-fascist and pronounced us a threat to American democracy. What we see here is nothing more than an attempt to silence conservatives by accusing them of using exactly the sort of banana republic authoritarian tactics that the left is itself using. Well, Mr. Biden, to steal from a line from the comic Pogo, we have met the fascists, and they aren't us. Before we close, please allow me to put in a shameless plug for my book, Rules for Anti-Radicals, a Practical Handbook for Defeating Leftism. Last year, I looked around for a guide to teach our volunteers the nuts and bolts tactics for defeating leftism, not only in the political arena, but also in daily life. When I couldn't find such a book, I wrote it. You might recognize the book's title as a play on Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, which has been the playbook used by the left for the past 50 years. But Rules for Anti-Radicals goes far beyond Alinsky. Oriented toward both activists and average concerned citizens, it draws from my 28 years of grassroots leadership to empower conservatives often bludgeoned into the silence by the left. It's a comprehensive guide to direct action in economic, political, and legal arenas, essential for conservatives to defeat leftism. You can find Rules for Anti-Radicals at Amazon, at Barnes & Noble, or you can get an autographed copy from my site at rulesforantiradicals.com. Again, that's rulesforantiradicals.com. Better yet, if you use the coupon code GRNC at my website, $7 for every book sale will go toward defending gun rights. My name is Paul Vallone. You've been listening to Guns, Politics, and Freedom on the Big Talker Network at bigtalker.live, where every Saturday at 1, Sunday at 5, and weekdays at 11, we give you the ammunition to better defend your gun rights. Please check out our sponsor, Hyatt Guns, America's largest gun shop, at hyattguns.com. See you next week.